Before you scroll, picture this, an entire cafeteria filled with laughter, chatter, and the smell of warm food, and in the far corner, one little girl, completely alone. No friends, no smiles, just a single piece of bread and a bottle of water in front of her. Every other table is filled with kids swapping snacks and telling stories, but hers is silent. And then, the whispers start. Whispers that will turn into something cruel, something she'll never forget. The lunch bell had only just rung, but Eastbrook Elementary's cafeteria was already alive with noise. The kind of noise that only happens when hundreds of children rush in at the same time, shoes squeaking against polished floors, trays clattering, voices bouncing off the painted walls. Bright posters lined the room, their cheerful colors advertising everything from "Eat your greens" to "Kindness counts." Long tables stretched from one end of the cafeteria to the other, the smell of fresh pizza and fried chicken hanging in the air, making stomachs growl. At the center of it all, the popular tables were filling up fast. Groups of friends called out to one another, waving over classmates with wide smiles. "Hey, over here. Save me a seat." The cafeteria staff hustled behind the counter, ladling soup, slicing pizza, and handing over cartons of milk. But if you looked all the way to the back, past the bustling crowd and the laughter, you'd see a small table pushed up against the wall, almost as if it didn't belong. Sitting there was Lily. She was 9 years old, with brown hair tied neatly into a ponytail. Her uniform was clean but faded, the knees of her socks slightly worn. She sat quietly, her back straight but her shoulders ever so slightly hunched forward, like she wanted to make herself invisible. In front of her sat a small pink lunchbox. One that had seen better days, its edges frayed, and its once bright color dulled from years of use. She opened it slowly, almost cautiously, as if hoping no one would notice. Inside was a single slice of bread, plain, no butter, no spread, and a small plastic bottle of water. No chips, no fruit, no colorful snacks to trade or show off. Just bread and water. It wasn't much, but Lily was used to not much. She placed the bread on the table, resting her hands on either side of it for a moment before taking a small bite. Her eyes stayed down, fixed on the table's scratched surface. She chewed slowly, carefully, as if stretching out the tiny meal might somehow make it feel like more. Across the room, a table full of kids noticed her. It always started the same way, just one person catching sight of her lunch, then the nudges, then the pointing. Lily could feel it before she even looked up. That heat. That prickling sensation on the back of her neck. She glanced up quickly. Just enough to confirm it. A boy with messy blonde hair leaned over to the girl next to him, whispering something. The girl's eyes flicked toward Lily, then back to her friend. A small smile tugged at her lips. Another boy, further down, looked straight at Lily, then down at the bread, and grinned in a way that wasn't kind. The whispering grew. Lily shifted in her seat, her fingers curling around the bread as though someone might try to take it away. Her shoulders curled inward, almost like she could fold herself into the chair and disappear entirely. She didn't look at them again, but she didn't need to. She knew how this went. The glances. The soft laughter that wasn't meant to be soft at all. The way they would turn back to their own food with exaggerated delight, showing off their juice boxes and sandwiches as if in some unspoken competition she had already lost. Her stomach clenched, not from hunger, but from the heavy weight of being seen in a way she wished she wasn't. She wanted the clock to move faster, for the lunch period to end, for the bell to ring so she could retreat somewhere, anywhere, else. But the minutes stretched. The laughter from across the cafeteria seemed to grow louder. And Lily kept her eyes on her bread, taking another small, slow bite, willing herself to be invisible. The sound started small, just a faint ripple in the ocean of cafeteria noise. A giggle here, a snicker there. Lily didn't need to look up to know it was about her. She could feel it, like the way you can feel the heat of a campfire without standing too close. She kept her head down, eyes locked on the single piece of bread in her hand. Her fingers pinched it gently, as though holding it too tightly might make it crumble apart. She took a tiny bite, chewing slowly, carefully, almost deliberately, because the slower she chewed, the less time there was to hear what was coming next. But the whispers were getting bolder. Across the room, at one of the fuller tables, a girl with a bright pink jacket leaned toward her friends. Her ponytail bounced as she whispered something, and a slow smirk spread across her face. Lily didn't hear the exact words, but she didn't have to. She saw the reaction. Heads turned. Eyes glanced toward her, then away again. And then it happened. The girl sat back in her seat, lifted one hand, and pointed, not discreetly, not secretly, but with all the intention of making sure Lily knew. Her finger aimed right at the faded pink lunchbox sitting on Lily's table, and her voice, louder now, sliced through the background chatter. She said something. Lily didn't catch all of it, but whatever it was, it landed like a stone dropped into a still pond. The table around her exploded in laughter. Not the warm, shared kind of laughter you have with friends over a silly joke. This was sharp. Cruel. The kind of laughter that doesn't invite you in, it pushes you out. Lily's chest tightened. She forced herself to take another bite of bread, chewing slowly, as if pretending she couldn't hear them might make them stop. But it didn't. A boy at the far end of the table leaned forward, cupping his hands around his mouth like a makeshift megaphone. His voice carried easily over the cafeteria noise. "Hey, Lily," he called out, dragging her name like it was something to play with. "Forgot your feast." The words hit her harder than she expected. They weren't just teasing, they were designed to put her on display, to make sure everyone saw exactly what she didn't have. She kept her head down, swallowing the bite she'd been chewing. It felt heavier than bread should feel. Her throat ached, and she reached for her water, unscrewing the cap slowly just to keep her hands busy. The sound in her corner of the cafeteria changed. It was as if a bubble had formed around her table, a space where the laughter outside seemed louder, but her own space was suffocatingly quiet. Somewhere, a chair scraped against the floor. Another giggle. The rustle of snack wrappers being torn open. Lily's ears picked up every sound, every movement, because she was suddenly so aware of herself, how she sat, how she held her bread, how she took a sip of water. Her cheeks burned. She could feel the heat rising, starting at her neck and crawling up toward her ears. She didn't dare look up, not at the boy, not at the girl in the pink jacket, not at anyone. Instead, she twisted the edge of her bread in her fingers, the crust breaking under the pressure. Tiny crumbs fell onto the table, but she didn't brush them away. She just kept twisting, kept her eyes locked on that bread as if it was her only anchor in the world. And she tried, really tried, to keep her eyes from watering. But the lump in her throat was growing, and every swallow made it worse. She told herself she wouldn't cry here. Not now. Not in front of them. But as the laughter rolled on, echoing across the cafeteria, it was getting harder to keep that promise. In the far corner of the cafeteria, where the noise softened just enough for thoughts to be heard, a man sat alone. The polished sheen of his charcoal gray suit caught the overhead light, but it was the quiet authority in his posture that truly set him apart. This was not the seat of a teacher, nor a visiting parent juggling coffee and conversation, it was a reserved space, kept for guests who mattered. Thomas Carrington was one such guest. The invitation had been formal, the kind printed on heavy cardstock, asking him to visit Eastbrook Elementary as an honored alumnus. He had cleared an hour from a schedule that rarely allowed him to breathe, meetings, negotiations, decisions worth millions, because the letter had mentioned something that tugged at a long-forgotten place in his mind, a project to fund a new school library. Books. Safe corners. Places where the world's noise couldn't touch you. Now, sitting in that cafeteria, Thomas wasn't thinking about contracts or budgets. His attention had narrowed, drawn to a single table on the far side of the room. She was small, maybe 9, her shoulders curved inward like she was trying to fold herself out of existence. Her hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, and in front of her sat a faded pink lunchbox. He watched as she opened it, revealing a single piece of bread and a small bottle of water. No sides. No dessert. Just the barest of meals. Thomas felt an uncomfortable tightening in his chest. He had been watching for several minutes now, and he had noticed the shift in the air around her. It was subtle at first, the sideways glances from another table, the whisper that made one girl's lips curl into a smirk. Then, the more overt signs, the finger pointing, the burst of laughter that came not from joy but from ridicule. From his vantage point, he could see everything. The way her fingers worried at the crust of her bread. The way she tried to chew without lifting her gaze. The way her water bottle stayed close to her hand like it might act as a shield. And perhaps most telling, the way no one sat with her. He leaned back slightly, letting his eyes take in the rest of the cafeteria. Groups of children clustered together in noisy companionship, their tables crowded with lunch trays and traded snacks. Somewhere, a chair clattered against the floor, and the smell of fried chicken drifted past. But in the little circle of air surrounding that one girl's table, it was quiet. Too quiet. Thomas knew that kind of silence. He remembered the cafeteria of his own childhood, different city, different time, but the same unspoken rules. Back then, his clothes had been secondhand, his lunch a mismatched collection of whatever his mother could afford that week. He could still feel the prickle of eyes on him, the whispers that grew into something sharper. He remembered the heat in his cheeks, the deliberate way he pretended to read the labels on his food so he wouldn't have to meet anyone's gaze. That memory was why his jaw was tight now, why his fingers had curled slightly on the tabletop. Because watching her was like looking at a reflection of a boy he thought he'd left behind years ago. The cruel laughter rolled across the room again, bouncing off tile and metal. It wasn't loud enough to draw the attention of the teachers stationed at the far end, too busy chatting, too far removed from the little storms that brewed among children. They saw only the surface, a lunch period running smoothly. Thomas saw the undercurrent. He noticed the way Lily's shoulders flinched, not dramatically, just enough to show the words had landed. He saw the pause in her chewing, the subtle tightening of her grip on her bread. She was doing what he had once done, trying to make herself small enough to disappear. But disappearing, he knew, never worked. He let his gaze linger, the details etching themselves into his mind. The bright pink jacket of the girl leading the whispers. The boy at the end of the table who leaned forward to mock her. The way the rest of their group laughed, not out of malice alone, but because laughter was easier than standing apart. It struck him, in that moment, how quickly cruelty could become a performance. His eyes returned to the girl in the corner. She had not looked up once since the teasing began. Not at them. Not at anyone. The hum of the cafeteria seemed to fade for him, replaced by the slow, steady rhythm of his own heartbeat. Somewhere deep in his chest, an old ache stirred, a mix of anger, memory, and something he couldn't quite name yet. He wasn't here to get involved. He was here to shake hands with the principal, to look over the library plans, to maybe sign a large check before leaving. But as he sat there, watching her shrink into herself while the rest of the room buzzed on, he felt the shape of the hour changing. And though Lily had no idea anyone was watching, she had already become the center of his attention. The bread hit the floor with the smallest of sounds, a soft, pitiful thud against the cafeteria tiles. But to Lily, it might as well have been the roar of 100 eyes turning toward her. She froze. For a moment, she thought about pretending it hadn't happened, about keeping her gaze locked on the table and acting like the bread was never hers. But the silence in her little corner had already broken, replaced by a gasp so exaggerated it could have been part of a school play. "Oh no," a voice sang out, dripping with false concern. "There goes your lunch." The table of giggling classmates erupted again, their laughter swelling and carrying across the room like an invisible wave. A few students who hadn't noticed before now turned their heads, curious, and Lily's cheeks flamed hot. Her hand twitched toward the bread on the floor, but something about the collective attention, those dozens of unseen eyes, pinned her in place. It was just bread. Plain, white, slightly squashed from the pressure of her lunchbox. But now it lay in the open, on display, stripped of its quiet dignity. Across the cafeteria, Thomas Carrington's fork paused midair. From his seat at the guest table, he had been watching, weighing, remembering. But this moment, the bread tumbling from her hands, the cruel performance that followed, shifted something inside him from passive observation to quiet resolve. He set his fork down. The polished silver made no sound against the table, but the decision was final. Without a word, he stood. The simple act drew attention. It wasn't every day a man in a tailored charcoal suit rose from the visiting dignitary's table in the middle of a school lunch. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. The children closest to him noticed first, their chatter falling into whispers as he buttoned his jacket with the precise, unhurried movements of someone who was very used to owning a room. His polished shoes tapped against the tiles, measured, steady. Each step carried him past tables piled high with trays and juice cartons, past the churning sea of chatter and the clatter of utensils. The sound of his approach didn't demand silence, but it bent the air around him just enough to make people notice. And notice, they did. Some of the teachers glanced up briefly, then back to their conversations, assuming he was heading their way. The group of laughing children quieted, exchanging glances. One of them sat a little straighter, as if preparing to explain the joke should an adult intervene. But Thomas Carrington didn't stop at their table. He didn't slow down, didn't glance their way. His stride was unbroken as he cut a path straight toward the farthest corner of the room, the one place no one ever seemed to go unless they had to. Toward her. Lily kept her head down, fingers tightening around the water bottle that now felt like her only shield. She could hear the footsteps drawing closer, each one loud in the echo chamber of her embarrassment. Her stomach sank. Attention from adults in moments like this rarely helped, it only made the laughter stick longer. She imagined he might ask her to pick up the bread, or worse, ask if she needed something else to eat, words that, no matter how kind, would only tell everyone in the room that she didn't belong. The footsteps stopped beside her table. For a long second, she didn't look up. She stared at the pale surface of the table, at the faint scratch marks from years of restless hands and impatient lunches. Her ears burned. Then, a voice. It was deep, but not the kind that boomed or demanded. It was warm. Steady, the way a cup of tea feels when your hands are cold. Mind if I sit here? Her head snapped up before she could stop herself. The man was tall, his presence filling the space in a way that felt both solid and strangely safe. His suit was the kind you saw in magazines, but his eyes, there was something in them that didn't belong to a magazine photo. Something that said he'd seen her kind of lunch before, maybe even eaten it himself. For a heartbeat, Lily didn't answer. She wasn't sure she could. The cafeteria noise seemed to fade into a low hum, replaced by the rushing sound in her ears. He was waiting, not impatiently, not as though this was a favor to her, but as if her answer genuinely mattered. Somewhere behind him, she heard a chair scrape across the floor and a whisper travel down a line of students, "He's sitting with her." Lily swallowed hard. Her fingers loosened from around her water bottle, and she gave the smallest of nods. The corner of his mouth lifted. Not a full smile, but something close. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down as if he'd been planning to eat there all along. The polished shoes stilled, the jacket settled against the chair, and for the first time that lunch period, Lily didn't feel quite so alone. For a moment, the cafeteria wasn't a cafeteria anymore. It was a theater. Every head seemed to tilt in their direction, every conversation lowering in volume until the soft hum of whispers replaced the clang of trays and the scrape of chairs. Somewhere far off, a lunch lady's voice called out for more milk cartons, but here, right here, it was as though the air itself had paused. Lily's breath caught. She blinked up at the man towering over her small table, his shadow stretching across the lunchroom floor. She had never seen him before, not here, not anywhere, but there was something steady about the way he stood, as though the noise and stares of an entire room couldn't move him. And then he smiled. Not the tight-lipped, distracted kind adults give when they're being polite. This one was different. It reached his eyes, softening the sharp lines of his face and melting away some of the tightness in Lily's chest. It wasn't the kind of smile that pitted her, it was the kind that seemed to say, "You matter." Without a word, he set down his tray. The tray wasn't loaded like the others, no mound of pizza slices or stack of cookies. Just a simple sandwich wrapped in parchment, an apple, and a small cup of coffee that sent curls of steam into the air. Still, the way he placed it in front of her felt deliberate, like it belonged exactly where it was now. The legs of the chair scraped softly against the floor as he pulled it out and sat across from her. He didn't hesitate. He didn't lean over to whisper something first or glance around for permission. It was as if, in his mind, this table had always been his destination. "I was hoping to share lunch with the most interesting person here," he said lightly, his voice carrying just enough for the words to drift beyond their little corner. Lily's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The sentence was too strange, too impossible. Her. Interesting. The only thing interesting about her lunch was how quickly she could eat it without being noticed. Before she could process it, he was unwrapping his sandwich. The bread was thick, golden brown, with slices of roast chicken and lettuce peeking from the sides. The scent reached her almost instantly, warm, comforting, the kind of smell that reminded her of bakeries she sometimes passed on the way to school. The tearing of the bread sounded louder than it should have, somehow punctuating the silence that still lingered in the air. He slid one half across the table until it rested gently on the edge of her tray, beside her lone bottle of water and the now empty space where her bread had fallen. Lily stared at it. Her fingers didn't move. She wasn't sure if she was allowed to take it. "I can't eat it all," he said with a faint shrug, as though the act was casual, unimportant. But the way his eyes stayed on hers told her it wasn't casual at all. Somewhere behind him, a chair squeaked and a voice, thin and uncertain, muttered, "What's he doing?" It came from the table that had been laughing at her minutes earlier. The words weren't loud, but the confusion in them was clear. This wasn't how the script usually went. They had expected her to shrink further into herself, maybe cry, maybe throw away her lunch and leave. They hadn't expected this, hadn't expected him. One of the boys leaned toward another, lips moving in a low whisper. This time, though, no one at their table laughed. Lily's fingers finally moved. Slowly, carefully, she reached out and touched the edge of the sandwich. The bread was soft, still warm. She looked up again, half expecting him to be watching the rest of the cafeteria, but his gaze was still fixed on her, as though her reaction was the only one that mattered. "Thank you," she said, her voice so quiet it almost disappeared before reaching him. He nodded once, not in the hurried way people do when they want to move past gratitude, but like he was storing the moment away. "You're welcome, Lily." She blinked. "How do you know my name?" His lips curved into a small smile again. "I asked the principal earlier. I was curious about the girl sitting in the corner." Her cheeks warmed, not from embarrassment this time, but from something she didn't quite recognize. She took a tiny bite of the sandwich, the flavors blooming in her mouth. It wasn't just food. It was proof that someone had noticed her, really noticed her, in a way that wasn't about mockery or pity. From across the room, a group of older students pretended to go back to their conversations, but every few seconds, their eyes drifted back to the far corner. The cafeteria's energy was changing. And Lily, for the first time in what felt like forever, didn't mind being seen. The first bite of the sandwich was still warm in Lily's mouth when she realized the man across from her hadn't stopped watching her, not in the way people stared when they were judging, but as though he was waiting for her to take her time. He took a slow sip of his coffee, setting it down gently before speaking again. "So, Lily," he began, his tone easy, as though they were old friends meeting for lunch, "What's your favorite subject in school?" She hesitated. No one had asked her that in a long time. Usually, the only questions directed her way were things like, "Why do you wear the same sweater every day?" or, "Is that all you're eating?" She swallowed, setting the sandwich down carefully. "Reading," she said at last, her voice small. "I like books." His eyebrows lifted slightly, his expression softening even further. "Books," he repeated, as if the word itself was a treasure. "Any favorites?" She gave the smallest of shrugs. "I like the ones about faraway places. Places where people start with nothing but end up somewhere better." Thomas leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the table. "That sounds like a story I'd want to read too." The hum of the cafeteria had begun to return, chairs scraping, trays clattering, snippets of conversation floating past, but here at their table, it was still warm and quiet, a pocket of calm in the chaos. He took another bite of his sandwich, then asked, "And if you could go anywhere, any faraway place, where would you go?" Her answer came quicker this time, surprising even herself. "Paris." She almost smiled at the word, though her lips barely curved. "I saw it in a book once. The Eiffel Tower. It's beautiful." Thomas nodded slowly, like he was committing it to memory. "Paris," he said. "I think you'd like it there." For a while, they ate in silence. It wasn't uncomfortable. In fact, it was the opposite. Lily didn't feel the need to rush, to make herself small, or to pretend she wasn't hungry. The half sandwich sat on her tray like a quiet promise that not all days had to be the same. After a few minutes, Thomas spoke again, his voice gentle. "That's a nice lunchbox you have." Her eyes dropped to the small, slightly dented tin box in front of her, faded blue, with a sticker of a cat peeling at one corner. She almost laughed, though there wasn't much humor in it. "It's old," she admitted. "It used to be my mom's when she was little." "She must have taken good care of it," he said, as though it was something to be proud of. Lily hesitated, her fingers tracing the metal edge of the box. The words came slowly, but they came. "It's all I bring most days. Mom works a lot, 2 jobs, so she's not home much in the mornings. She tries, but," she paused, swallowing. "We don't have a lot of food. I give the better stuff to my little brother. He's only 5. He gets hungry more than I do." Her voice wavered, just for a second, and she hated that it did. She didn't want to sound weak. But Thomas didn't look at her like she was weak. He didn't look away, didn't frown with pity, didn't sigh like adults sometimes did when they heard something sad. His gaze was steady, calm. Respectful. "That," he said quietly, "is one of the bravest things I've ever heard." The words caught her off guard. No one had ever called her brave before. Not for something like this. Around them, the room was slowly shifting back to its usual rhythm, but Lily noticed that the table where the teasing had started earlier was still quieter than usual. A few students glanced over, their expressions less mocking and more curious. It was as if they were trying to figure out who this man was, why he'd chosen to sit with her, and why it seemed to matter so much to him. Thomas leaned back slightly, giving her space but never breaking eye contact. "You know, Lily, when I was your age, I had a lunch that wasn't much different from yours. A little bread, sometimes just an apple. I remember exactly how it felt to sit in a room full of people and feel invisible." Something inside her shifted at his words. She'd never imagined someone like him, someone in a suit, someone important, could have felt like her. "Did it get better?" she asked quietly. He smiled faintly. "It did. But not all at once. Sometimes it starts with one person who sees you." She didn't know what to say to that, so she took another bite of the sandwich instead. It was easier than trying to put the feeling in her chest into words. When the lunch period began to wind down, students started returning trays, the clatter of plates and cups echoing across the room. Thomas stayed seated, as if he had nowhere else to be just yet. Then, just before the bell rang, he spoke again, soft enough that only she could hear. "I'd like to stay in touch, if that's okay with you." Lily's eyes widened. "Why?" He tilted his head slightly. "Because I think you have more stories to tell. And I'd like to hear them." Her lips pressed together, but this time they formed the faintest of smiles. Not the nervous kind. Not the kind she forced for pictures. This one was small, genuine, unpracticed. She nodded. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, Lily realized she wasn't dreading the afternoon ahead. The conference hall shimmered beneath golden light, its glass walls offering a sweeping view of the Manhattan skyline. It was the kind of room that made people feel small, even if they were dressed in their best. Rows of chairs stretched toward the stage, and every seat was full: journalists, philanthropists, business leaders, educators. Behind the curtain, Lily steadied her breathing. She had faced crowds before, board meetings, donor luncheons, even televised interviews, but this was different. This was her first keynote. Her name was printed in bold letters on the event program. Lily Harper, Director, Meals for Every Mind. The applause began even before she stepped out. She adjusted the microphone, feeling the familiar flutter in her stomach, and let her gaze sweep the audience. And there he was. Front row. Slightly to the left. Thomas Carrington. His hair had gone silver since that day in the cafeteria, but his posture was still upright, his expression still warm. The same kind smile, the same attentive eyes. Seeing him there felt like a thread had been pulled across time, tying this moment to another, 15 years ago. She smiled, not the poised, polished smile she had practiced for cameras, but the unguarded one she'd first given him at 9 years old, across a cafeteria table. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but her opening line carried the weight of everything that had brought her here. "Once," she began, "a man chose to sit at my table when no one else would." The room fell silent. She let the words hang there, like a bell's echo, before continuing. "That moment changed my life." She could see a few curious expressions in the audience, people leaning forward, ready for the story. But for her, it wasn't just a story. It was a memory that lived with her as vividly as if it had happened yesterday. The smell of fried chicken and pizza in the air. The chatter of kids in clusters. The bread in her lunchbox, dry in her hands. The sound of laughter from across the room, sharp and stinging. And then, shoes tapping against the cafeteria tiles. A shadow falling across her table. "Mind if I sit here?" Her chest tightened at the memory. She could still feel the warmth of his voice, the kindness threaded into it, the way it cut through the noise and made her feel, if only for that moment, safe. Back on the stage, she continued. "When I was 9 years old, I didn't have much. Most days, my lunch was just a piece of bread and a bottle of water. I tried not to mind. I told myself I was saving the good food for my little brother, because he was younger and needed it more. But the truth is, I minded." Her voice softened. "I minded the whispers. The stares. The way kids looked at me like I was something to laugh at." In the front row, Thomas's gaze didn't waver. He sat as still as if her words were meant for him alone. "On one of those days," she went on, "a man I'd never met stood up from his table, walked across the cafeteria, and sat down with me. He didn't offer pity. He didn't tell me to cheer up. He just shared his lunch, asked me questions, and listened, really listened, to my answers. That day, I didn't just eat better. I felt seen." A ripple of quiet spread through the hall. She noticed a woman in the second row dab at her eyes with a tissue. "That man didn't know it then, but he planted something in me. A belief that small acts can change the course of a life. He showed me that dignity and kindness can exist in the same breath." Lily's gaze swept the room again, but always found its way back to Thomas. 15 years later, I stand here as the director of Meals for Every Mind. Our mission is simple: no child should have to go through a school day hungry. We provide free meals to underprivileged students across the country. Not just food, but a space where they can sit without fear of shame or ridicule. She paused, the next words settling in her chest before she let them out. I know what it's like to eat alone. And I know what it's like when someone refuses to let you. The audience was utterly silent now. Some leaned forward in their seats, others sat back, their expressions softening as they absorbed her words. She let the silence breathe before her voice deepened with quiet conviction. That day, in the cafeteria, I learned something I carry into every project we take on: it's not always about giving someone the world, it's about giving them a seat at the table. As she said it, her mind flickered again to the image that had never left her: a man in a charcoal suit, sliding a half sandwich onto her tray, speaking as if she was the most interesting person in the room. She closed her speech the way she had always planned to, by turning toward the man who had unknowingly set her on this path. Thomas Carrington, she said, her voice warm but trembling with emotion, 15 years ago, you changed the direction of my life. Today, every meal we serve, every child who feels seen instead of shamed, that's part of your legacy too. Thank you, for choosing my table. For the first time in the entire speech, Thomas looked away, just briefly, to clear his throat and blink back something in his eyes. The applause began softly, then built until it filled the hall like a wave. Lily stepped back from the microphone, and for a fleeting moment, the years between 9 and 24 collapsed into nothing. She was once again the girl with the dented lunchbox, only now, she was the one standing up for others. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Share it so others remember that one small act of kindness can last a lifetime. And if you believe in making a difference, no matter how small, hit the like button, subscribe for more inspiring millionaire stories, and let's keep spreading hope, one table at a time.